everyone. Good morning. We're so excited to have you all here to hear our global panel of experts talk about working with adolescents and transforming gender norms. This is for the Gender and Positive Youth Development Community of Practice. My name is Sina Kapungu, and I'm the Senior Gender and Youth Specialist at the International Center for Research on Women. Chelsea's our co-champion with the Gender COP. I'm first going to start off by just letting you know a little bit about YouthPower. We are a program that really tries to advance solutions through increasing the capacity of youth-led and youth-serving organizations to disseminate knowledge and research and programming focused on positive youth development. When we talk about positive youth development, we're talking about it in terms of really trying to build the assets of youth so that they have the capacity to use those assets to contribute meaningfully to their societies with the support of their enabling environment. And some of the activities that YouthPower has been involved in is focused around the measurement of PYD in low to middle income countries, and also providing a systematic review of PYD programs in low to middle income countries. And we also have mechanisms in where we do buy-ins with missions and where they can further research and programming within PYD. And so in terms of the gender PYD community of practice, really the focus of this community of practice is to integrate PYD and gender into PYD programming. And so I welcome everyone to join the Gender and PYD COP. We'll be having in-person meetings, webinars, and other events. It's an opportunity to provide resources and really to network and engage with other implementers and researchers who are gender focused. Let me start off by also discussing some of the activities that we'll be doing in the upcoming months, and Chelsea will discuss those.
Well, I'm actually just going to focus on a couple of activities. As some of you may know and others may not be aware, we are currently, we have our grants under contract request for applications out. This is a small grant mechanism to advance the evidence base around some neglected areas of gender and PYD integration. So that application period is open until April 13th. If you are interested in it, please check out the YouthPower website and send in an application. If you are a member of the Gender and PYD community of practice and you are interested in helping with the review, please do contact us. We are looking for reviewers to take part in the grant selection committee between April 21st and May 12th. So if you have a little bit of time available in that period and you are not applying for a grant, then you can help us review. So let me know if you're interested in that. We also have two small working groups that we're getting off the ground with the Gender and PYD community of practice. One focused on adolescents and HIV and one focused on gender-based violence. So if you're interested in taking part in either of those working groups, please also let myself or Chisina know. And we will be sending out some information to those groups in the coming weeks.
So the focus of our discussion today is about age-appropriate methods that work for measuring gender norms across contexts. We have a group of panelists who I'll introduce, 4 panelists in person and 2 panelists that are online. First, we have Jean Roquepartain, Vice President of Research and Development at the Search Institute, and he'll be discussing the developmental assets profile. Next, we have Kristen Mari, Associate Professor in Population, Family, and Reproductive Health at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, and she will be talking about the Global Early Adolescent Study. And then we have Sarah Baird, Associate Professor in the Department of Global Health at George Washington University, and she'll be discussing GAGE, which is the Gender and Adolescent Global Evidence. Online, we have Pranita Ashut. She is the Senior Technical Specialist of Adolescent and Gender at the International Center for Research on Women, and she'll be talking about the gender equity movement in schools. And then also online is Alice Wellborn. She's the founding director and chair of trustees for Stepping Stones, which is a training package focused on HIV, communication, and relationship skills. Our moderator for today will be Rebecka Lundgren, and she serves as Deputy Director and Director of Research at the Institute for Reproductive Health at Georgetown University. And I will give it over to Rebecka.
Thanks, Justina. Well, welcome everyone. I think I can speak for my fellow panelists. We're very excited to have this opportunity to talk about our work and share that with you. So I'm going to start by just framing issues a little bit. I think we're all here because we recognize the importance of a healthy start, an early start. And we know that the 10 to 14-year-old age is a really pivotal time when there's a lot of rapid changes, social changes, biological changes, neurological changes. And it's a great opportunity to help young people get on the path to well-being and healthy adulthood. So the problem is that there's very few documented programs for this age group. There's a lot out there, I think, but not very well documented, and even fewer have been evaluated. So it's difficult to develop evidence-based programming for this group without better evidence and better measures and better ways of researching and working with them. So we want to talk about that today. And I also want to start by kind of framing this discussion in the maybe talking about child rights and child-centered research. So lots of times we might talk about young people or the children as sort of miniature adults. So I want to kind of talk about what makes children different and how are we interested and how do we want to engage with them in terms of research. So sometimes people kind of push back and say, well, why are you using the word child? They're 10, they're 11, they're 12. So, under the UN Convention on the Rights of Children, anyone under 18 is considered a child. So I'm using child because I want to us to all remember today that these are children, young people, and they're different from adults. And we need to think about that as we conduct research and do programming with them.
Can you speak louder?
Yes, I can. So I think our challenge, traditionally there's this idea that children are enculturated, they're socialized. It's a top-down process where the adults tell them how they're supposed to behave, they teach them how to grow up, and it's a very passive process. People think of children as passive individuals that people do things to. So the whole child rights, child research community is really looking at that differently. So we kind of see children as individuals who co-create their futures, their gender identities, their culture, and their relationships. So we also want to think about that in terms of when we research with them. We want to try to do research which helps us learn from what children think from their own vantage points, how they see the world, how they see their culture, rather than always being sort of talked out. This is what adults think children should do, or this is the questions that we think we should ask them. So that's our challenge, I think, that we are all facing who work with this age group, how to really amplify the voices of children, recognize their agency, and do that in the research that we do. The other piece of that is that children then, if we understand and recognize their capacities and think of the kind of use a positive youth development lens, so they have a right to contribute to evidence generation and decisions about the programs that they're going to be involved with. So that, maybe 10 years ago, maybe less, 8 years ago, there was a lot of talk about, well, children can't really be competent informants. They can't really talk about their experiences because of these cognitive issues at their young developmental stage. So I think that's changed quite a bit now, and people do recognize that if we can come up with the right methods, the right approaches, children can be, represent their worlds, their understanding of their lives, but we have to develop methods and approaches to do so in a way that they can engage fully in the process. So that's really what we're going to talk about today. As you know, there's a lot of challenges. So young people, a lot of the research that we use, methods we use, really advantage adults over children. You have to be very articulate, you have to be able to read, you have to be able to sit still for a couple hours for an interview. So none of those things are particularly useful when you're doing research for kids. So how can we think about the cognitive and developmental abilities of young people and tailor our research to really let them use their skills and what they're good at, the knowledge that they have, in order to help us understand better and develop programs for them. So Jean is going to just say a few words about positive youth development and how all of this fits in with the PYD approach.
Thank you, Rebecca. And of course, the connection of rights and positive youth development is, we could spend a whole bunch of time talking about how cool that is. I think what I wanted to highlight with positive youth development is to just say, first of all, it's been around the initial framework started coming out 25 or 30 years ago. And so there are a lot of ways of thinking and talking about it that have evolved in the field, most of them in the US. And so this is the opportunity to expand and understand positive youth development globally, I think is still a growing edge for all of our work. I want to just highlight 3 underlying principles that build on what you've talked about, but I think that they're important as you look across the positive youth development field. Obviously, the first is it recognizes and seeks to build strengths in young people. So in contrast to deficit-focused things, it really is saying we need to understand the sources of strength and resilience in young people's lives, both within themselves and in their broader communities. In our work at Search Institute, we talk about internal assets as those internal strengths and skills that kids have, and then the external assets are the supports and resources and relationships they need in their communities. So that first piece is identifying core strengths that play out in positive outcomes across lots of domains. So if you're good at making decisions, you make good decisions about lots of different things. For example, positive youth development is ecological in its orientation, where the person and their context are interacting and co-creating development together, as Rebecka mentioned. And so you can't understand kids in isolation of the context, and you can't only look at the context and not understand what kids are bringing to the party. So it's that both and kind of thing. And then the third point is what I would call the cascading or the cumulative effect of positive development. That when kids start doing good things, they have good opportunities, those build on each other. And so it's this notion of development is cumulative at many regards. We see that a lot in the risk literature, but I think also thinking of it in terms of the strength literature, understanding strengths in one domain can cascade into all areas of life. And so for us, those are some core principles of positive development.
Great, thanks, Steve. So with that, we're going to launch into our panel discussion. Basically, we're going to talk about, everyone's going to share something that's worked well, something that hasn't worked well. I'm sorry? Oh, yeah. So my colleague Nana is reminding me, but we are still going to do this. What's worked well, what didn't work, and what we might do differently in the future. Kristen and I are going to reflect a little bit on the discussion at the end, and then we'll open it up for general questions and answers. But before we do that, we're going to start with each person giving a quick overview, like 1 to 2 minutes of the project, maybe the most recent project that they're kind of building their comments on. So I think I'm going to start. So a lot of the, what I bring to the table today is coming from our work with the GREAT project, the gender-based project working on gender in northern Uganda that was implemented with Save the Children and Pathfinder International. So you can see on the slide, we had a large kind of broad range of research, starting with formative research, which used a lot of projective, participatory, metaphorical techniques, moving on to a cohort study using longitudinal in-depth methods with a cohort of 60 kids. Then we also have more of a structured baseline inline survey to analyze the effect of the intervention and the kind of other research that you see up there. So I think that's all I need to say. And I think our next, go to Dean, and he's going to talk a little bit about his work.
Yes, I just briefly mentioned the work we've been doing with the developmental assets profile, which is a 58-item self-report survey measure, which we'll talk about the value or not of surveys in kids' lives, because there's challenges with that. But it's a measure we've had the opportunity through a variety of partners, including some in this room, to work with kids to contextualize in different countries around the world, about 30 plus countries in multiple languages, and beginning to have young people reporting on their well-being from their own perspective, and both looking at themselves and the communities around them. And so that's really the focus of our work. And I think it's a really useful, because we've been doing it about a decade, it's a useful case study in the joys and sorrows of measuring self-perceptions of well-being across cultures.
Thanks, Jean. So I'm going to turn it over to Alice. So she's going to talk to us about some really exciting work that Stepping Stones is doing with children.
Hi, everybody. Can you see me okay now?
Yep. Yes.
Hi, thank you. So greetings, everybody. So what is Stepping Stones with Children? Well, Stepping Stones with Children has sprung out of the original Stepping Stones training program, which was first published back in 1995. So we just had our 21st birthday for that. And that was a training program on gender, HIV, communication, and relationship skills, particularly for adolescents and for adults. Stepping Stones with Children takes that to a much younger age. So we start now with 5 to 8-year-olds, 9 to 14-year-olds, girls and boys, and their adult caregivers. It's still a very holistic, comprehensive program, including psychosocial, physical, sexual, and material themes. And it's long. People don't have to do it all, but there are 29 sessions if they want to. So the 5 to 8s are in one group, the 9 to 14s in another, and then the adult caregivers are in a third group. And each of them have their own facilitators, and they are all working on the same topics through the sessions, but in different adapted ways for the different age-appropriate peer groups. Building on what you were saying about strengths-based and asset-based, it very much uses positive language, appreciative inquiry, and many different participatory approaches such as role plays, games, and drawings, which of course children are terribly good at. And then it really builds positive cross-gender and intergenerational communication. And sorry, just to add that my organization is actually called Salamander Trust, and Stepping Stones is our flagship training program in that. Thank you.
Thanks, Alice. So we'll turn it over to Kristen, who's going to talk about the global early adolescence.
So greetings, everyone. So the Global Early Adolescence Study, as the name suggests, is a global study across 15 different sites, and I won't go bother to list all of them. It was implemented in 2014, and I should add that Rebecka was also, she's part of this project as well. She's a fabulous consultant. And it's divided into two phases. The first phase was really exploratory, and that was really meant to address three main questions. The first was, how can we understand the transitions to adolescence across culture? And we looked at the viewpoint for both adolescents and their parents. And then we wanted to know, what are the key interpersonal relationships within an adolescent's life, early adolescent's life, and how do those change? And then finally, we wanted to know, well, how do adolescents, early adolescents, adopt and enact these gender norms, behaviors, and what is it that influences that? So we did, as part of the first phase, 3 primary methods, and that was, first of all, we did narrative interviews with both adolescents and their parents separately, and then we did 2 participatory research methods. One was a timeline, where we asked adolescents to draw all the events in their life between birth and adulthood we divided it between males and females to try to identify what some of the differences were in the events. And then finally, we did a Venn diagram exercise where we asked them to draw the relationships where big circles signified the relationships that were most important and smaller circles that were least important. And then we also had them put smiley faces and sad faces to represent relationships that were both positive and negative. So I'll stop there.
That's great. Thanks, Kristen. So we're going to go to India. I think Karnita is there. And
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Hello? Yeah. Okay. So GEMS, or the Gender Equity Movement in School, is a primary violence prevention program which aims to foster gender equality, redefine masculinity, and negate all forms of violence. GEMS draws its approaches and strategies from 4 conceptual pillars with gender equality at its core. And the first being the engaging and initiating discussion early when notions of gender and power are being constructed. To be inclusive by working with both boys and girls, women and men, using gender transformative approach to challenge and change gender relations. It's about pausing and reflecting on realities and encouraging critical thinking. And the last pillar is taking institutional approach for larger and sustained change. In GEMS program, we use multiple approaches and activities, including group education activities with girls and boys, school-based campaign, orientation of school staff, and capacity and perspective building of teachers to lead the program. Just briefly, currently the program is being implemented at multiple sites within India and outside, reaching to large number of students in like, hundreds of schools. And I'll just stop here and we'll share more as we move along.
Thank you, Pranita. So we'll turn it over to Sarah at CC.
Great. So I just want to talk quickly about the Gender and Adolescents Global Evidence Study. We are at the beginning of our study, so I'm also really excited to be here as a learner as well. This is a 9-year DFID-funded research study to try to understand what works to improve the lives of adolescent girls globally. There are multiple parts to the research. The two that are most relevant for today is there's a participatory research piece in conflict-affected settings, as well as a longitudinal mixed methods study in 4 and possibly 5 core countries: Rwanda, Ethiopia, Bangladesh, Nepal, and maybe India. This gauge really builds on young lives, with the core difference being that there will be interventions embedded in the longitudinal study. Recognizing the kind of gap in knowledge among younger adolescents, the core part of our sample will be sort of 11 to 12-year-olds when we start, and so we'll be following them until they're 19, 20, and if it all goes well, DFID will also give us 5 more additional years. So this really is a great opportunity to follow young, both boys and girls, from very early adolescence all the way into adulthood. The slide sort of shows our conceptual framework, which I think very much draws on what Jean was saying, this idea that, in order for interventions to improve the lives of girls, they need to not only be focusing on the girl, but in the sort of socio-ecological world that she lives in. So the interventions that we will be looking at will, have components with the girl, with boys, with parents, with communities, to recognizing kind of the importance of, and interacting with systems, recognize the importance of those. What's both great but also challenging about this is that we are very interested in influencing multiple capabilities. So you'll see on the slide 6 different capability areas, ranging from education to bodily integrity to sexual and reproductive health. And what I'm very interested in today is kind of thinking about, measurement across those domains, how you get them for early adolescence, and in particular, when you are trying to measure all these things, kind of shorter modules that actually can capture something useful.
Thanks, Sarah. That's great. I think you can see why we were so excited about bringing together this group of panelists with really these diverse, sort of cutting-edge experiences. So we're going to start out kind of on the positive side, and we're going to talk about what worked and why. And we've kind of had some conversations, and a few people have volunteered to start because we don't have time to share, everyone share. So we're going to start with Pranita, and she's going to talk a little bit about something that they've done that she thinks worked well, and tell us why it worked well.
Yeah, so from GEMS program, there were definitely lots of learnings, and there's several things that work. One thing particularly I would like to share with you all is the whole engagement and involvement of students in the development of the program itself. So the students were actually part of the program process development since beginning, and we started the project with an exploratory study to understand children's understanding and expressions of gender, power, and violence in a workshop mode. So in just briefly to share with you that, in each workshop there were 15 to 20 students, and to make them comfortable, we had single sex groups workshops facilitated by same sex facilitators. And in the workshop, we primarily used role plays followed by discussion. And for the role plays, students were they formed groups, and each group was asked to develop a role play on how people interact with each other and express power in family setting, among friends, and in school. Nothing else was detailed out or were told to them. They developed scripts, assigned role to each other, and enacted. And each role play was followed by a discussion. And to our surprise, through their role plays, they presented complex power and gender relation. And in fact, the story was very layered. It was said in a simple way, but not in a simplistic way, I must say. And in fact, the role, the role play, the body language added an additional dimension in terms of nuancing their own understanding and expressions. And the further discussions added a more nuance to how their just also the justification that they had for the gender discrimination, violation, and violence that are existing in their day-to-day life, in their home, and in their the ecosystem that they live in. So it really helped us understand the process, so their understanding, and also gave us a lot of confidence that the gender, despite being complex, to children not only understand, but they understand with all its nuances. Yeah, that was a really good learning for us. And in fact, all those workshops and the information that we gathered in those workshops were actually used to develop group education activities, GEMS activity book, which were then shared back to the children for their review and feedback. And those feedbacks actually were incorporated. The big learning that we had from that workshop, and why we felt that workshop really worked, and the role play was, to great extent, that type of participatory activity helped in minimizing the power dynamics that also exist between adolescent and adults, which was like the students and the facilitators who were there. And it actually, through role plays, they were able to express themselves much more and in a much better way than what they could have done just by being part of a discussion. So it was a very good learning, and it helped us in developing the program, GEMS program, what we have now. And this process, we use this process subsequent. Like, we started in Mumbai, and one of the states in India, but then subsequently it's been adapted and used at very different settings, even including Bangladesh and Vietnam, with bulk of the content and also the whole core principles remaining exactly the same. And in those settings also, students were engaged in really looking at to what extent the adaptation is needed, how they understand and express gender in relation, and it really worked well, not only in India but in other settings as well. So I'll stop here.
Thanks, Pranita. I can tell from people's faces that's really resonating. The idea of the workshops, the use of the formative research, and also the point that you mentioned about power dynamics, since that is really the key problem that we have, is there's such a large power differential between the researchers and the children. So getting really accurate, honest responses is a big challenge. And also your comments about adaptation and using these methods in different settings, I think is also really valuable for us to think about. So we're going to continue thinking about participatory methods, and I'll turn this over to Alice to talk about their experience with those types of methods.
Okay, thank you. Can you see me? Can you hear me? Great. Okay, thanks everybody. So what you were saying, Pranita, from India resonates a lot with what we've been doing as well. So we're going to just describe to you the third session of the whole workshop. We have a session on gender and sex, and that starts with, it's a 3.5-hour session, and we have the first exercise is the difference between sex and gender, and then another exercise on being a female, being a male. Later on, we also talk about trans issues. And then in the third exercise, checking our beliefs. And then the fourth exercise, which I'm going to share with you, is about using courage to change gender norms. So how do we do that? So as I explained earlier, there are 3 separate peer groups for all of the whole workshop, and the 3 different ones are the 5 to 8s, the 9 to 14s, and the caregivers, each with their own facilitator. So the aims and description of this particular exercise is using courage to change gender norms. The aims are really to learn about the virtue of courage. And when we talk about virtues, we're talking about timeless and universal, non-cultural specific things. And courage is obviously something which you find anywhere and everywhere in the world throughout time. So we're learning about the virtue of courage in our lives and how we can practice it to promote fairer gender roles and norms. And so first of all, in each of the peer groups, the facilitator encourages the participants to agree on what we mean by the virtue of courage and have a little discussion about what courage means to the participants. And then once they've agreed on that, they're invited to do role plays to show how we can practice courage to make gender roles fairer. So once everybody's agreed on what they understand by courage, in the 5 to 8 group, the children are split into boys and girls, and similarly the 9 to 14 group. So in each group, there's a facilitator and a co-facilitator so that they can have that subgroup split. And then amongst the caregivers are invited to split according to the sex of the child whom they are looking after. So one group for caregivers of boys, the other for caregivers of girls, or if they have both, it's up to them which group they prefer to join. And then in each of those subgroups, the facilitator then invites them to think either about how they or children in their care could use their gender courage, as we call it, to deal with a scenario of their choice, or if they feel a bit stuck about trying to think of something, we suggest some scenarios to them. So, for example, one that we've suggested for boys aged 5 to 8 is your friends are laughing at you because you want to play with a doll. Or for girls aged 5 to 8, you want to ask your brother to help carry water because you both have homework to do. And then for the boys and girls 9 to 14, a couple of examples that we've come up with are your friends say you must prove you're a man by drinking beer and paying a girl for sex. So you can see it's a little bit more sexualized there for the older age group. And then for girls aged 9 to 14 years, for instance, your teacher asks a question about safer sex in class and you know the answer, but you'll feel shy to put up your hand because you know that the boys will then laugh at you and call you a quote unquote prostitute. So we're setting up those scenarios, but as Pranita was saying, we're also very much offering people to come up with their own scenarios if they prefer. We don't want to impose things on them if they'd rather come up with their own ideas. So basically then they're developing their own role plays and looking at how they could cope with a scenario like that in their lives and to think about how they could overcome it and use the virtues within them to try to find a way through that scenario. So when each group is brought back, the subgroups so let's talk about the 5 to 8s, for example. The boys are brought back together with the girls, and then each of them in turn watches the role play that has been developed from the other subgroup. And then after each role play, there's a discussion around what gender role or belief did we see in this role play, and who changed things, and in what way did they manage to change them, and how did they do that, and what courage did they show in doing that, and then who showed that they had a perception of how other people think and feel. And that's something that we bring up very much throughout the whole process. What we call mind sight is thinking into other people's minds about their feelings and their actions. And then finally, and I think this is a critical question which we keep returning to throughout the whole program, how can we all support one another to develop courage and mind sight in these situations? So in each context, whatever role play or discussion we're having throughout the whole manual, it comes back to a collective responsibility. How can we all support one another? So there's no way that ever there's a sense of, oh, well, it's the boy's fault or it's the girl's fault. It's actually down to us all to sort this out together. So that's just a very brief glimpse into one of the exercises. And also we have what's called a facilitator's journal, so that not only are the children learning for themselves, but the facilitators are also recording all of the role plays and what was discussed and so on at the end of each session, so that over the whole process of the actual workshop, we have that ongoing monitoring of each session and how it went, and also evaluation of the discussions which were coming up and how people were resolving them. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Alice. This is great. A couple of topics that I think run through all of our work are you're very conscious about the population that you're dealing with, or your group you're dealing with, are not all the same. So you talk about boys, girls, the younger children, and the older children. So I think that's something that we all struggle with, and also the use of scenarios. And others of us call it vignettes in different ways that we use stories and scenarios in our work. So I think we're going to turn and talk a little bit more about the surveys, which on my behalf, I'd say giving us a little bit more of a struggle than the qualitative work. So I'm going to ask Jean to talk a little bit about his experience with that.
Right, so I'm going to come back to the DAP and just say for the record that we know that surveys are not right for everything. and they're not right for every population, but we do think there's a place for them in terms of being able to collect data fairly efficiently if you can get the right measure, and the potential at least for comparison across populations. So how do we take what's a fairly efficient methodology and make it actually work, and where it can be appropriate for younger, for children in the age we're talking about? And I think our best success has come when we're actively engaged with children in refining the measure. So when we go in and working with our partners in a new cultural context, we will often do, when we can, we do focus groups. Our partners does focus groups with children, parents, and others about what does it take to grow up well here, and have the conversations with people in the community about what does it take to grow up here, and then begin to see the themes from that connecting with the measures that we have in the developmental assets profile. And then out of that, identifying items that are culturally relevant and specific and also consistent with the theory, and then testing that. And so we're engaging young people in that whole process. So rather than having a professional translator, the best work happens when kids are in a workshop to help us to discover how we do this. And there's a back and forth between the researchers and the people in the community. And in our experience, we tend to get better measures in the end by engaging in that kind of process together. So I'll just leave it at that, and we can talk more about other stuff.
That's really exciting. I think we're all really eager to think about how we can engage young people more actively in developing measures and in the research process. So we're going to turn to where I think some of the greatest learning is what didn't work. So we're going to each of our panelists are going to talk a little bit about something that didn't work and why. And I'm imagining we're going to be able to learn quite a bit of that. So we're going to start with Pranita. She's going to talk about the gap between self-efficacy and behavior. Do we have you there, Pranita?
Yeah. So, sorry, I didn't hear, but are we going to talk about what didn't work?
Yes, what did not work and why?
Okay. So, I mean, there are some thoughts around it, and one is more conceptual question even we are struggling with is primarily in terms of when we say measuring norm change. I think the one question is when to say the norm has changed. I'll just like to share one example. So the evaluation that we have done in India, there is this whole norm around girls playing sports, and what is there that as girls grow older, they stop playing, and even more so stop playing with boys. So that's the common practice. Now, what we found in the GEM schools that 2 years down the line, girls continue to play with boys and also among themselves. But in comparison school, proportion of such girls have declined, and those changes are significant. But the question is it's still half, 50% girls continue to play. So, I mean, can we say that the norm has changed? Can we say there is an indication that norm is changing? Or probably it will take some more time, maybe 5 years down the line, we should come and see that if girls, not the same girls, but the girls in the school continue to play with boys, even as they grow old. So I think those are some of the questions, in terms of when we say about norm changing, what is there something can we say that, okay, is there some cutoff? If 60% or 70% of a population is practicing certain things, that's when it can be called as norm. Or so that's one question that I think we really need to think around. So that's one question, not so much of challenge, but it's more in terms of conceptual. The another challenge we had in our study was around reconciling between self-efficacy and the actual behavior. So what we had found, when we triangulated longitudinal data of children over time, what we found that while on certain things like, in terms of peer pressure or bystander intervention in case of violence, students had reported high self-efficacy. But if you look at their actual behavior in the situation of violence where they witness violence, uh, intervening was not that high. So, how to understand that. And in fact, what we found that more than quantitative survey, qualitative actually provided us much more insight in terms of the whole thinking process that children also undergo, and in terms of the decisions that they make around the behavior that they need to act. So in the during the discussion in depth interviews that we had conducted with students, that was also longitudinal. What we found that students do their own, assess a situation, evaluate the situation, seeing that is it really the right, will that be a right step to intervene, what is more important in that situation, will I be still safe if I intervene, or will that adversely affect, and based on that they make a decision whether to intervene or not intervene, because sometimes it may not be very easy for them even to report others, because that environment is not really existing where they may receive the necessary support that they are looking for. So in that situation, but then when we get into the quantitative survey, that doesn't really provide that type of space for students to think and nuance their answer. And that's where we feel that, a lot of those self-efficacy statements were coming very high, which were not really a good predictor that there's a potential of positive behavior uh, in that way. So that's what our struggle was. I'll stop here.
That's great, Anita. I think you're bringing something that's pretty core to our work. So understanding change and when we've achieved change, and what is a meaningful change, and how do we interpret the statistical results we're getting, and so it's significant, but is that meaningful? Also thinking about sustained change, and also the multiple factors that influence the outcome. So this is a very complex measurement process. It's probably not just, we need to really understand all the factors that are happening, in a project to really evaluate where we're going and what we're achieving. So I'm going to turn it to Sarah, and she's going to keep talking along the statistical, I guess, this quantitative piece.
Sure. So I think what I really wanted to talk about is really just kind of what we are struggling with now, and kind of recognizing as limitations or things that we don't necessarily do well. So one thing that's come out of this conversation is clearly the importance of both quantitative and qualitative methods. But unfortunately, many of us are trained much better in one of those disciplines versus the other. And so as much as we talk about mixed methods, as much as we put mixed methods as a focus, when things come out of projects, they still tend to be fairly siloed, right? Because the publication outlets are different, the kind of audiences are different. And so but right, as you said, there are just certain things that are just very difficult to measure quantitatively. And so I think we just have to, I'd love to think more about how we actually make things truly mixed methods and what that means. And how we can actually better, when we're talking, for example, most of my work is on randomized controlled trials and on impact evaluation. How can I also talk about qualitative results to that kind of audience where they also see that the qual is a causal impact? And so, I think we're getting better. So me as an economist and a quantitative researcher, I think I'm now much better in kind of appreciating and understanding the importance of mixed methods, but I don't think we do a great job of really sort of expressing that to the audience. So that's one thing that we've really been kind of struggling with is how do we do that moving forward. A second thing that I think pulls on what the other speakers have been saying are kind of how, if we do want a quantitative measure of some of these less tangible things and more on sensitive topics, what are some techniques or what are some ways that we can think about getting that? So whether it's social norms or voice and agency or gender-based violence, what is it that is appropriate to ask an 11 or 12-year-old about experience of violence? And do we actually think we can get data that means something, et cetera? And again, I think that's a place where mixed methods could again play a role. And then I guess finally, particularly in a project like GAGE, where we're measuring outcomes across 6 capability areas, I can't have an hour-long survey for each topic. I also probably don't have funding to really do what I should do in terms of having workshops with children around each possible outcome. So how can I kind of do my best to get the best that's out there and say, look, yes, it'd be great to spend years developing this, but I need something that I think is tangible that I'm going to then measure impact on, and how can I make sure to do my best job with what that is, recognizing that maybe over the 9 years of the project, things will move and I'll be able to develop better measures. But I think, places where there are like these 80-item scales, is there someone doing work to develop a 10-question module that maybe we all know is not quite as good, but still gets us something that measures something. And I think a lot of people on this panel are doing work in this area, but I also think it's probably something that people are still struggling with as well.
That's great. So Sarah brought up something we haven't talked a lot about, which is feasibility and being realistic about what we can do. And I know we've all probably wanted to spend a lot of time, like prior to the baseline, really figuring out these measures and pilot testing them, and then like the time is done and you just have to go to the field. So that's an example. And just the multiple outcomes was a huge issue for GRADE, that we had multiple outcomes, multiple age groups, two sexes, and it was really complicated to do a good job. We didn't measure everything well as a result because there was just too much on the plate. So I'm going to turn now to Kristen, who's going to talk about the work they've been doing as kind of a case study wrap-up of all this discussion we've had so far.
Well, great, yeah. So a lot of the themes that I've heard already are totally relevant with what we have found in the Global Early Adolescent Study. So one of the things, as I said before, that we wanted to find out, this was a 15 country site study, and so we did a lot of training at the beginning to make sure that the methods were standardized, but we didn't know, to what extent do these methods work across these cultures? What are some of the issues? And so I should add that we do have a special supplement coming out in probably June with the Journal of Adolescent Health that is going to really focus on what I'm talking about right now. But for this first phase with these qualitative methods, we did want to know, how did they work? What were some of the key lessons learned across these sites? And one of the surprising findings from my point of view was just the convergence. Given the different cultural context, the responses that I got when I asked our researchers across the sites were amazingly uniform. And that could really speak to just how these methods work with the age group. So one of the key findings was that the participatory methods, the timeline and the Venn diagram, worked really well. And they worked well to really develop trust because they allowed the engagement between the youth and the researchers much more. We talked about before the minimizing of these power differentials, and those methods really contributed to that. And in some respects, some of the sites said that, for example, our timeline, that produced just as much rich data as our narrative interviews did. And they could actually see some of these gender behaviors be enacted within that research method in of itself, because in some cases the boys were really dominant. In other sites they talked about the older boys being particularly dominant. So that was a research methodology, but we could see some of these things actually being played out within the research method. The challenge that we found across the sites was, of course, this narrative method. Now this narrative method was set up, there was not only just basic in-depth interview questions, some of which were very abstract. For example, one of the questions that we asked about to get at kind of these gender norms was, imagine waking up the next morning and, to each gender we'd ask, and you were the opposite. So for a girl, imagine you were a boy. Imagine you were a girl, for example. And that question was very, very difficult for these younger adolescents. So anything that was very abstract was just, it didn't go well. And another thing that didn't go well was, we wanted to know gender socialization. So how did they come to learn some of these things? And when you ask an 11-year-old or a 12-year-old, well, how did you come to learn what's appropriate for a girl? That was just, most of the responses across the sites were, you just know. So some of those questions, again, with this age group, while we thought at first that we were being concrete, it really wasn't. So you have to really think about, especially the younger you go, the more concrete the question has to be. And the other thing that we learned is that, having a one-on-one interview, adolescents get easily bored. And so one of the things that we did that was part of the interview, that was probably the best aspect of it, was this Venn diagram. Because they got to draw, they got to engage. And the researchers across the sites noted that that was a method that just kind of allowed the discussion to emerge, and much more than the actual one-on-one questioning. And the other thing is that we had to take lots of breaks, and this was across the site. So this interview, in some cases, went for an hour. I mean, adolescents can't sit that long. So it was really important for them to just kind of note when the adolescents started to get bored, when they started to get distracted, and then take a break and then come back. But across the sites, that was the feeling that we heard. So it was really interesting, from my point of view at least, to see kind of that level of congruence on how these methods worked. Now we are in the second phase, and I should just add that we are doing a quantitative survey. Right now we're piloting it, and we have a lot of work to do, because right now the average time that it takes an adolescent to take this survey is about 90 minutes, which is way over. But again, it's all of these things that we want to try to find out, and across the sites, figuring out what should be cut, what shouldn't be cut, given our overall research question, is really difficult. So we're still working on it, and next year at this time, I'll be able to report much more. But there's a lot of challenge. So
That's great. So just to build on that, one of the ideas, because we're working in DRC on this, was to implement the survey in multiple times. So it's only 45 minutes each time, but we don't have the funds to do that. Yeah. So that's kind of the reality piece, where we had to cut that out. So I'm going to add a little bit to what Kristen said about something sort of that worked and that didn't work, and then we made it into something that worked, starting with GRADE. So I want to talk about scales, quantitative measures. So one of the innovations in GRADE was that with Nana, we developed some ways that you could do a quantitative measure in a participatory way. So you could do like a Likert kind of scale where agree, run to that tree, disagree, run to that tree. So you read statements, but the kids are active, they're moving, or you could do like roll dice to ask questions, or have pictures to file sort. But we captured the answers in a quantitative way. So they were up, they were moving, they were engaged, they weren't like focusing on the adult interviewer. But so that worked really well. But the scales for the younger age group, they turned out not to be very internally consistent. So we sort of failed on that. But then we took that learning into some work we've been doing with Save the Children in Nepal, and developed, continued to develop scales. And we just finished a project where we did some very rigorous assessment of the measures. Not all of them were scales, but scales and measures. And we learned a few interesting things. So we learned that one of the problems, some of the things that we were looking at were like early marriage, girls' education, very high endorsement, right? So we just didn't have enough variability in the measures to be valuable. So we needed more response options, but the kids had a problem with a lot of response options. So that was one challenge. We also found that there was only one scale that worked equally for boys and girls. So they all ended up to be gender-specific scales, which is okay, but it was, I think, a good lesson for us. We came up with 8 different measures and scales that were, internally consistent. They had some congruence. We were able to kind of map the scales across other constructs with the youth and also their parents, because we had parent data. So we have a few good measures, but the one most interesting thing about them is the best measure we have is a card sort measure. So it was around attitudes towards gender roles, and we have pictures of gender roles, and the kids would sort them into piles, male, female, or both, right? And then from that, we developed a scale, and it worked really well. So one of the things that we're thinking of is maybe trying to work with the scale and doing more kind of different techniques, maybe using the card sort format for other kinds of measures. So sort of kind of an interesting lesson and journey about really struggling with these quantitative measures and how to make them work for the younger kids. So we're going to move into our last component here for the panel, at least. And we're going to ask, the question is going to be, moving forward, if you could do anything you want different, your resources are not constraining you, what would you do? So I like to ask the question is, if you had a magic wand and you could just, do some research differently, how would you do it? But maybe if that's a difficult concept, just think, like, what's your dream kind of thing that you would do next in terms of measurement? So we're going to start, I guess everyone gets to answer. Is that right? Maybe let's start with Dean.
Okay, I'm going to say two things, but I'll make them really fast. One thing is I would start measure development with a global context in mind from the very beginning, so that we're not sort of constantly trying to adapt from a Western context or wherever, but we're actually building it from the ground up. So that would be one. The other is that I would actively involve young people in the measure development all along the way, but also in the data collection and data interpretation, so that they're active partners through that process. I think that would transform the quantitative work we're doing.
Kristen?
Okay. So Jean took what I was going to say. But in addition, I think one of the things that would be so beneficial is you think of all the different research and programs that are addressing this young age group, and how often do we get the opportunity to share with each other? And I think it's those opportunities that if I would have a dream, it would be some way to kind of collaborate more, to share more about what worked well, what didn't work well, because I think we'll all benefit in the long run if that could be a better opportunity.
So let's keep going down the line and we'll move to Sarah.
Right. Yeah, so I think similar to Kristen's point, I would love a website where I could just sort of search and be like, okay, are there cool ways to collect scale data among young kids? And there I would find Rebecka's work and modules or contacts or, if stuff's not publicly available, at least someone I could talk to understand what works or not. It's kind of events like this that help me better understand the full landscape. But, trying to, you go from one person who mentions these 3 people, who mentions these 4 people, and, before you know it, you have like 1,000 surveys to look through, and you don't actually know what worked well and what didn't, right? So you could send me your global early adolescent survey, but actually half of it may have worked horribly,
right,
and
exactly.
I wouldn't know that by looking at it. So kind of even anecdotes or pieces on a puzzle that sort of says what's going on would be helpful. And then the other thing is, we are talking about how it's really hard, like, in the end, I never use all the data I collect, right? And so, yes, we're always struggling to get surveys. It's always hard to shorten surveys, but if I could just wave a magic wand and be like, these are actually the 10 measures you're actually going to care about.
So, I think,
Anita.
all the earlier 3, so adding all the 3 points each, plus 2 things that, as you said, that there's no resource crunch, so I'll use that. One, in terms of the programming, is to have a, longer term program. Right now we have GEMS' 2-year program, but we would like to have it for a longer duration. And in terms of measurement, having a longitudinal study, one is to measure not only the change that's happening in their personal and the environment, but also the long-term implication of the program that's happening and the learnings they're having, to what extent those remain sustained as they move along in the adult life. So those 2 things, plus what's been already said earlier.
Thanks, Penny. Okay, Alice, what are your...
Yeah, and it's the hardest for me because you all said everything that I wanted to say. Yeah, I've been so inspired listening to everybody. I've been so inspired listening to everyone, and it's definitely really great. My brain's just kind of brimming with ideas and sparks, and have you thought of this? And I'd love to hear more about that, and so on. So definitely the opportunity has been terrific, and it'd be really brilliant to have more. I particularly feel in our experience with working to 5 to 8-year-olds how totally inspiring the children are, and well, we knew that already, but working with them has really validated that. And I think that it would just be so brilliant for all funders to recognize how critically important it is to be working with children, even below 5, because these gender norms, I have friends with 2-year-olds downstairs right now who totally know which gender they are as a child, and it's never too early to start, I think. And as Pranita is saying, the long term, looking at this in terms of life cycles, I think is so critical, because sadly I do feel that the project limitations that we're all facing are really not responding to what we actually all know about the need for long-term programming, and the implications of what's happening early, and the critical importance of investing in young minds in terms of long-term outcomes, I think is a huge desire, which shouldn't be a dream, it should be a reality.
Thank you, Alice. So to close this little part, I want to say that you all are living my magic wand dream. So Alice is working with the younger children, under 10. Sarah, you have a longitudinal study, so that's like an incredible option. Kristen is working on a multicultural, multi-site study, and Jean gets to work with positive youth development with really great partners around the world, very tied to programming. So I think, in a way, we're all working. We have great opportunities, and we're very fortunate to be able to kind of move this work forward. So I want to close and move on to the questions, but there's a little announcement I'd like to make. So the next slide, maybe. So Sarah mentioned that one. Yeah. So Sarah mentioned a resource library. So there is the Very Young Adolescent Toolkit on K for Health, which is a resource library that my colleague Renan, who's here with us now, is helping us to keep updated. So we're trying to put everything on there related to very young adolescents, cross-sector, not just reproductive health, but all different sectors. I don't think it's particularly strong on measurement, but it might be a nice home for a measurement compendium. So something for you to have as a resource. And we are also working, this group of colleagues, on putting together a compendium around measurement on this issue. So I think that will be maybe something available, within the year, I would think, if not sooner. And also here at IRH and through Passages, the project that I'm working for right now, USA Funded Project, looking at putting together a measurement around, and Kristen is a part of that as well, some kind of meeting around very young adolescents, programming and measurement. So I think we may very, very likely have the opportunity to come together this year to talk and reflect and share ideas. So I guess I would like to now open to questions. And I think Lindsay is going to share some of the, I'm guessing there's some questions.
We just have one so far.
Okay.
It was actually for Alice. So we had a person interested in the concept you were talking about virtues. So this technique of discussing courage seems pretty interesting to promote citizenship and critical thinking about gender norms. What other virtues have you found useful to boost discussion among children?
Sorry. Yes. Sorry, I heard it. I have to click on 3 different things to get back online for you. So
Alice,
just a
ideas
bit of
about
a delay.
discussion.
Yes, there's actually a great project called the Virtues Project, which you can look at online, which lists a variety of different virtues and gives lots of ideas about how we can all use the concept of virtues in our lives. The way that we've made use of this in our program is we've just got a list of, I don't know, I can't quite remember, maybe around 26 virtues. So the whole thing about virtues is that we all have them inside us. So it's what Jean was talking about, our assets, our strengths, our resilience inside us. We all have a toolkit in there. So we're not talking at any time about problems or, that problem child. We're talking about, you've got amazing strengths inside you. Just think of all of the brilliant things that you've done and the resilience you've had, and building on that to make use of your kindness, your generosity, your honesty, your courage, your thoughtfulness, your determination. I can't remember the whole list. You'd have to look at the manual. But one thing that we do is at the beginning of each session, and a separate child each time, or caregiver in the caregivers group, has the opportunity to pick a card out of a bag for the day. And that's the virtue which they're going to make use of during the day. And then at the end of the day, what's so lovely is no matter what virtue has been picked, of course, somehow, somewhere or other, it connects to what's happened during the course of the day. And we invite everybody. We at the end and the kind of closing ceremony for the whole workshop, we present each of the caregivers and their children who've come to the workshop with their own bag of virtues, which they take home with them. And we encourage them then to start each day by saying, okay, each child in turn, and then the caregiver day by day, to again go through that pick a virtue. And then just think about it when they come back together at the end of the day, you know, have they made use of that virtue during the day? And again, you know, I think it was at I'm sorry, I can't remember who it was. Somebody was talking about the convergence of experience. And of course, you know, the point about virtues is that they are not culture specific. They are not time bound. They are universal issues, universal strengths, which we have all of us inside us, and completely timeless. And that's what's key about them. And you know, for children to begin to feel, oh, I do have this toolbox inside me. Oh yes, okay, you know, he's just said that I was using my generosity, or you know, she's just said that I was using my thoughtfulness, is actually just making us feel great about the fact that we have these great tools inside us, and that we can use them, and that we've been seen to use them.
Thanks. It's really exciting. I think I don't know about everyone else. I'm thinking about going back to the office and trying this, or else back to home. So thanks. Do we have any other questions online? Or if not, we can also open it up to the group here.
We have a two-parter question.
Okay.
What have been the panelists' experiences with interviewer choice, sex, age, authority figure, in the fielding of study instruments and the potential impact on the results and measurement? Second, what methods have they used to ensure that translations of instruments are capturing the essence of the study concept?
Great. So, anyone like to answer?
I could, yeah. So that was one of the things that came up when I asked the researchers across sites about what made a difference, what advice, and so the interviewer was a big component of that. And first of all, one of the things was that the interviewer should really know the population and be slightly older. So India used younger adolescents so that they were like, well, not younger adolescents, but 18 to 24-year-olds, I should say, so younger adults. And that seemed to work well. They could relate a little bit more. But other sites said it was really just key to have that, whoever the interviewer was, be able to relate with that population. So using slang words, knowing kind of what's popular was really important because they could interject that as part of the interview. The other thing was the personality of the interviewer seemed to make a big difference. So, you know, having someone that, again, it's that relatability, that ability to trust was really important. So having those characteristics, like in terms of dress, being able to, you know, I guess I'm just going back to the relatability factor was really key. And I'm trying to think what other questions was it?
Translation.
Translation. So one of the things we did was, so the PI, as the core center of Johns Hopkins team, we did not have the ability to kind of cross-check every site because we just don't have all of the resources. But what we did was we went over that as part of the training. And so each of the PIs and the site made sure that there was, we did several kind of quality checks. So, and that was in terms of, you know, making sure that the instruments, first of all, were relatability and you know, were translated okay. So we did the back translation. But then on the other side, making sure that the data also had the same meaning. And so, I mean, the only thing that we could make sure was that, you know, these PIs would do a cross-check, and so that they could verify that the transcriptions had the same meaning. But as far as overall quality, it's just something that we couldn't confirm. We just don't have the resources for that. So we're assuming that all the sites did that okay. But beyond that, we don't have, didn't have the resources.
Oh, yes.
I just wanted to ask about the sex of the enumerators. So I did a study with slightly older groups of 13 to 22-year-olds in Malawi. Our whole sample was girls. Our enumerators were from both sexes, and we do ask a lot of sensitive questions around sexual and reproductive health, relationships, who they're dating, how often they have sex, etc. And so our hypothesis was that they would actually, that the same gender would be a better fit. But it actually turned out they were much more comfortable opening up to men because they felt the men were less judgmental. It wasn't like their peer group, and so that kind of went against our. And they actually felt like, again, these were enumerators that are well trained and again had the right personality to do this. But actually, the girls felt more comfortable kind of talking about their behavior to men.
I've actually had the same experience.
Just to add a different dimension to it is the setting in which the interviews happens matters a lot. So we find that if you, for example, if you ask young people to do something in a school, they assume it's a test, and so they try to figure out the right answer. And so when you're measuring self-perception, that doesn't come out very well. So that would be one thing. And the other was we found in some countries really paying attention to how the interviewer and the young person are situated with each other. If they're looking directly at each other, there's a sense of intimidation. If they're both sitting side by side, there's a different dynamic that comes. And so actually spending time understanding the setting in a particular culture of how that interview takes place seems to really matter.
I think that's a really good point. I'm looking around the room, maybe only Kristen will understand that, but if you're talking to your adolescent children, like it's much better if like you're in the car, you're watching dishes next to each other, you're not like looking at them face to face.
Yeah.
I think, was there a question back here?
Kind of Stephanie Thungavella with Wars and Associates, and building on kind of the kind of situation and the interviewer, is there any kind of aspects of the studies where you're kind of looking at the design of the study and how that kind of contextual situation may be creating a more positive impact versus a negative impact based on the design of, like, say, I just saw a blue sky versus a rainy day, if those kinds of contextual design aspects are influencing any of the studies, and if there's any kind of way to assess those in the studies.
Okay. Looks like Jane might have a thought.
I think it's really hard in the real world to figure that out. We're doing a study with, say, the children in 5 countries, rural Africa, and we get the data collection weeks out, we get everybody sent out, and then it rains and nobody can get to the data collection. So just those are the realities of sort of how do you at least document those so when you see the data, it helps with the interpretation of sort of what's happening in the context, or there's just all those things that happen in the real world.
Yeah.
And I think the best you can do actually is document what happens, and somehow as you're thinking through the data, interpreting it as well. The other thing I would say though is sometimes a focus on positive youth development and introducing that language in that conversation is itself an intervention in the setting, to have them begin thinking about themselves and their culture and their community through a lens of strength. So that's not exactly your question, but I think that's another part of the context of doing research in a country where you say actually reframing the conversation around identifying your strengths and recognizing your strengths is actually itself part of an intervention.
And of course you get to the tricky point. For example, the card sort exercise I was describing, it's sort of an intervention. Because they're reflecting on different.
Yeah, and actually there's, I was talking to a colleague and there was conflict in their team between the quant and the qual researchers, because the quant was very concerned that the qual team, like that piece was going to mess up their intervention and X, Y, and Z. But I mean, you can, just like, so we always do enumerator surveys to get at some basic characteristics and then look at how those predict outcomes. You also tend to ask questions about whether other people were in the room, and so you could add, you could add a question like, what was the weather like today? Right? Just if you think that maybe kind of mental health scales and other things are influenced by whether it's a sunny or a, you can just sort of have the, have the final page of the survey where the enumerator makes some basic observations that try to capture some of those things.
So, in terms of I wanted to share like the earlier question that was asked about the age and sex of the interviewer. Can I pitch in there? Okay. So, based on our experience, like the study that we have done under GEMS in schools, we have actually, for the quantitative survey, we have used self-administered questionnaire, and in Indian context, we had used tablets with audio voice. because like based on our experience and the conversation with students, we also felt that they were more comfortable in filling some of the questions because there were a lot of questions around their own experiences of violence and the violence that they may have perpetrated against other peers. So their level of comfort in responding to those questions at at that little space and time without anyone asking them and they need to verbalize that, we found that they were more comfortable. But in terms of interviews, in-depth interviews, we had uh, moderate interviewers who were older, local, but I mean, we had experimented with new people, but also and also with the people who were part of the program, whom children had met and discussed. And what we found that the children were more comfortable with the people whom they had seen, but still discussing and sharing more personal information. They took a lot of time. So every interview, actually every round of interview went through at least 2 to 3 settings to have depth discussion, and of course using different methods. So it was the conversation, but the conversation were initiated through using photographs or giving certain situations. So those were the things that we used. Now the another question around the contextualization, like gems, we also had the experience of implementing gems at different countries and even within India in different contexts, urban and rural and tribal. And what we found that some of the basic principles and concepts are quite similar irrespective of the site. So manifestations may be different, but gender inequality, violence are still the same. The differences we found in the way people express those gender relations, and that's what was really important to understand and incorporate in the program so that they feel that the conversation that are happening are actually from their own situation and they could link it and share back their experiences. So that's how that's what our experience have been so far.
Thanks. I think those are really important comments, both on contextualization, but also time. Because I think working with this age group just takes a lot more time because you can't really rush them through. They need time to express themselves, to play, to think. So I think that is always a big challenge because we never have enough time. Right? And then move on to the next interview. So I think that's an interesting point that you had kind of hidden in there. So I think we need to probably wrap up.
Yeah,
Take one more question. Okay.
Several of you have mentioned using universal, non-cultural specific concepts. Can you say a bit more about how these ideas were identified as such?
Want to take a crack at that? How did we identify universal concepts, non-culturally specific concepts?
I mean, I could speak with how we developed our methodology. I think what was really key is, with a large study like the Global Adolescent Study, it requires a lot of coordination. And one of the things that we did was we hired a coordinator. That was her main job. But we developed communication strategies so that, I mean, at least from my standpoint, I feel like everybody really had an equal opportunity to contribute to everything along the way. So no point was there, here's what we're going to do, and this is how you're going to do it. It was always we incorporated the feedback along the way, and there was a mechanism for that. We had these. There were god awful times at 6 o'clock in the morning sometimes to have these conversations across the sites, but it allowed us that opportunity, which I think was really, really key, to make sure that everybody felt comfortable with the concepts and that they were going to be relevant to their sites. And we didn't know that going in, so it took a lot of time. So this project actually was first conceptualized in 2011 at the Dakar Family Planning Conference, and so it took 3 years to get it off the ground. So it was a lot of time and going back and forth to make sure that everybody across the sites was going to be okay with what we did. So I think the big lesson is just don't underestimate how much time that takes, especially if you're dealing with multiple cultures.
The other thing I would add is I would say we try not to presume universality, and we begin with the conversation about relevance in any one context and let each place own what is or isn't relevant. And so there's a sense of humility that you have to take with any concept, even if, in our case, we've worked in 30 countries with it, you still have to go into a country and saying, is this meaningful for you? And let people own it for themselves and not impose it on them.
I'd like to echo both of those comments, that it takes a lot of time and consultation and discussion.
I was just, sorry, I didn't want to break into what you were saying, Rebecca. Have you finished? Or? Okay, I just wanted to add that, the universality issue, I think you're absolutely right that we should never presume universality. What our experience with the original Stepping Stones has been, which in the end has been rolled out in basically around the world, is that I think what we have done is, like I described, we offer people the opportunity to describe their own experience or experience of somebody I know through role plays or whatever, so that they're building their own scenarios as much as possible. I mean, the examples that I gave earlier, we'd already had from previous pilots from the children, but I think it's really important not to impose scenarios when you're doing role plays or other exercises, but as much as possible to encourage people to come up with their own examples and situations, because obviously then the particular context, of course, is absolutely critical, but the fundamental given, I think, is that essentially we're all human beings, and we do, that comes back to the universality of these virtues as opposed to values, which we do identify as culture specific and time bound, which can change over time. So, for example, who collects water or, who milks the animal can vary from this community to the community across the river. But, the question of whether there's thoughtfulness or courage in this community or that community, that's a universal, and that's not questionable. So I think it's really important that we may remain totally respectful of all of the differences around the world, but that if we ask the question in the right way, we can then support people to come out with their own stories, their own narratives, and their own critical literacy around analysing what's going on for them, and if they would like to change it, how they can change it.
Thanks, Alice. I think you did a pretty good job of summing up the panel. Ask the question in the right way. So I don't know, are there any other burning questions? So then I would just like to thank all of our panelists who did an incredible job of keeping to like their 2 minutes.
Excellent.
So I really, would like to thank you all. And also for YouthPower and for Nana, who put this together and did a lot of work organizing it, and also talking with all of us to make it happen. And then for you in the room and those of you who are still online for joining us. And maybe pass it over to Tina, who's going to say a few closing points.
Yeah, I also want to thank the panelists. I know as the gender equality champion, we always get questions about what are the best ways to measure gender norms. And I think you gave us something to think about that we can integrate in our own work and also consider as we're dealing with measurement issues. I also want to thank Nana for helping to organize this innovating discussion. Just a couple of things before we leave. I want to encourage everyone to follow YouthPower on Twitter. We're always trying to grow our network. We will be having webinars and in-person meetings. We have 4 communities of practice, and if you go on our website, you'll learn more about it. And we will send you resources regarding this discussion, and also a link for a survey. So if you could fill that out, that would be great. And if you have any other ideas or suggestions of how as a COP we can disseminate and encourage sharing and learning amongst our COP members, we would greatly appreciate it. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah, really.
So are you in DC for the whole week or?
Well, I just often just like, okay, you know, just sort of,